Rehabbing an ankle is so much more than just calf raises and drawing the alphabet with your toe or some bullshit like that. In this video, I'm going to show you a much more useful approach. I'm sharing 3 of the most powerful ankle strengthening tools that allowed me to bounce back from a pretty severe ankle sprain just a couple of weeks ago. And it's meant that I've been able to get back out into the mountains in just a couple of weeks. Hang out to the end of the video where I'll share a link to the full routine where I break these moves and more down in complete detail. But let's get into it. So I think the most useful way to go about this is that I'll just bring up the drills here on screen and I'll walk you through them. But I want to start by dialing back a little bit, a couple of years, to a movement that you might be familiar with if you've done some of my training programs. And that is the knee drive. And this movement was adapted from something I saw Ben Patrick from Knees Over Toes guy do a few years ago. Whilst I was going through that phase, I wanted to really make something that was very easy to do without equipment. So whilst this knee drive is really good, I think a slight change that we can make to this movement is going to make it a lot better. So rather than reaching the non-working leg forward and leaning back with your torso, I found it's much more useful to have the non-working leg trailing behind, which is much more relevant to the gait cycle and also allows the user, you, to stack your head, torso, and hips on top of the foot. And that's really the secret and the power to this drill. Not only does it teach you to find your 3 points of contact in your foot, the first metatarsal, the fifth metatarsal, and the heel, which creates a stable tripod for the foot. It also helps you enhance this movement by creating and depressing the 3 arches of the foot, the lateral, transverse, and the medial arch of the foot. So if this is done well, it can also enhance proper movement in all of those 3 arches. So not only does the foot and ankle become much more stable as a result of practicing this drill, it also serves to help the foot do its intended purpose, which is to act as a spring to absorb force into the ground and recoil back. And this is without a doubt the secret to biomechanically efficient hiking, in my opinion. We have thousands of people that can attest to that, and this is not just about the isometric hold. It's also important that the journey that the knee makes over the top of the foot, it's about organizing the bones in the foot. So as you drive the knee over the toe, these bones in the foot need to open up, and that's the mechanism that creates the spring in the foot. So getting movement in these bones in the midfoot is incredibly important for all hikers. So the main cues for this drill are as follows. You're going to sit up in a staggered stance position with a straight knee in that front leg, and then we're going to very gently and slowly, as slow as you can, bend that knee. And what we often find when we test this with people is that they have a lot of hesitation. That knee movement isn't smooth at all. It's really jerky and they have trouble controlling it. They literally have difficulty just bending the knee really slowly. And that's a motor control issue, it's a sensory issue, and it does take coaching. So there are pros and cons to this movement. The big pros is that, as I said, it's probably the #1 drill that has resulted in, or at least set the groundwork for, the huge amount of success that we've had in getting people out of pain and back into the mountains. And it's insanely potent and hugely undervalued. The cons with this movement is that it's a sensory drill, meaning that it takes time and practice. It requires a certain amount of softness and attention to detail, which a lot of people just don't have the patience for, unfortunately, but for those that do, it pays off big time. So this is a completely different approach to rehab and movement of the ankle, one that is being led by the likes of Gary Ward from Anatomy in Motion. Connor Harris is also developing more styles of these kind of movements. But this one in particular comes from David Gray. And I've had the pleasure of working with David. I've been to his lower limb mechanics workshop and I've had him teach this in front of me, and it was hugely valuable. On to the next movement, and this one I'm very excited to share because it's one that I developed myself, and this is the crouch hold on the lateral border of the foot. This essentially is an overcoming isometric, meaning that we're overcoming the hesitation and limitation, not just in the ankle and the foot itself, but also in the knee and potentially the hip. Like most ankle sprains, mine happened where I rolled onto the lateral border of the foot. And I just rolled my ankle. So my foot came in and I put all this pressure on the lateral border. So what I'm trying to do in this movement is really shore up all of these intrinsic muscles in the foot and get that area really strong. But not just that, I'm trying to teach my brain to use my hip to control movement of the foot. And that's why I think this is so powerful. And I think it's a big reason why I was able to recover from my ankle sprain really quickly and get straight back out into the mountains basically within a couple of weeks. So after my ankle sprain, that left the area of my foot around that lateral side very tender after that incident. But after about a week of rest, I began to intentionally load that area in this hinged position, which promotes glute length and load. So I've got my hands on the bench, I have my knee bent, and I'm really quite forcefully pressing the foot into the ground on that lateral border of the foot where I just had that weakness and instability. The pros of this movement is that it teaches you to control your ankle using your hip and your glute, which prevents falls and increases stability and really lays the groundwork for producing a lot more power from the hip. The bad side though, the cons with this movement, is that many people will find it difficult to feel anything in this movement. You really have to go searching around and spend a good time in the position and hold that isometric and wait for the inhibition to start showing its face. Like you can see in this movement that I've got Elvis leg here, my knee is really shaking around, and that's the overcoming isometric that we're talking about. The difficult part of this is that when you've been in a movement pattern for many years that you may have adopted to avoid an injury or an area that your body doesn't deem as being 100% safe to use, then it can be very difficult to get out of that pattern unless you're coached out of it. So that's where good cueing and good coaching comes in. So let me see if I can give you a couple of cues here. We're going to have the hands on the bench. You're going to be in a hinged position with the hips going back. You're going to have the knee driving forward, and then you're going to push the kind of sensitive area, that lateral border of the foot, into the ground, and you're going to go searching for the instability. And so everyone is going to be a little bit different here, but I encourage you to spend some time in this position and really build up the tension that is created when you're holding this isometric. If your knee starts to shake and if your whole body starts to shake, you're on the right path there. What we're aiming to do here is to re-educate the brain and the central nervous system so that you can start to control the movement of the foot and the ankle with the hip, and also to build up strength and shore up those tissues around that lateral border of the foot that perhaps would have been damaged in the process of rolling onto the outside of the ankle. So that brings us to the third move here, which is plyometric. Now, plyometrics are so important for long-term foot and ankle health. I think no ankle rehab is complete without going through at least a little bit of plyometric work, because as we've said, the role of the foot is to act like a spring when we drive the knee over the toe and when we strike the foot with the ground. And there's no better movement to reclaim that springiness in the foot than plyometrics. So if you have rolled your ankle, then plyometrics should be in your ankle rehab diet, but it's important when you choose to actually apply them. Immediately after you roll your ankle is probably not a good idea. I waited a week before I started applying these drills. Some people are going to take a little bit longer. Some people might take 6 months, so just keep that in mind. But certainly in those later phases of ankle and foot rehab, it is going to be essential that you reclaim your ability to bounce on top of the foot. And if you don't go through this period of time, I wouldn't really consider it a fully rehabbed ankle unless you can hop and spring and bounce on one leg. So this can be done as simply as just skipping, but I like to add a couple of different variations. We can rotate through the hips, we can shift from side to side, we can experiment with hopping on one leg, and we can do it in a staggered stance as well. So I really like this version in the staggered stance where you've got 1 foot forward, 1 foot backwards, and you're just starting to experience a little bit of that bounce and a little bit of that hop. And certainly you could switch back and forth. You can really be creative with it. The main thing is that we're just exposing that tissue in the foot to a little bit more bounce, a little bit more spring, day in, day out. And that brings me to my final point here, which is that a lot of what I see in ankle rehab doesn't really allow for that final phase of progression where we really add load, we really add volume and intensity. And it's that volume and intensity that is going to be building trust and confidence back into that joint, but also into the brain and into the mind, because without that confidence, you're always going to be just hesitating with your foot and ankle a little bit. So if you want to see the full breakdown of this routine where I talk you through all of these movements, these are the exact movements that I used for my situation personally. A lot of this may be valuable to you if you have just recently rolled your ankle in a similar way. So to get access to that routine, you can join our free school. There's a link in the description. And this is an online community of hikers who are interested in learning their body, understanding some basic biomechanics, and learning to apply it. We can discuss the tools, you can share videos of you doing the exercises and get a little bit of feedback, and it is all for free. So far we have 400 members and it's an amazing place to hang out and learn, so I'd love to see you in there. If you like this approach to ankle rehab and you want a custom routine built for you, you can book in an assessment in the link below. We'll go through your injury history, where you want to be in a couple of months, and we'll start building something out custom for you. That's all for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the summit.